Hi all. As you know, I'm Vasha. Some of you know most of this story, but here and there I get questions about my cancer experience. Since I'm coming up to 2 years cancer-free, I thought it was a good time to release a video telling my experience from the very start, all the initial symptoms, all the way to today's. Who knows, it might help somebody. Either way, I'll try and keep this video as lighthearted as possible, but it's obviously going to get pretty dark and heavy here and there. Here is a list of trigger warnings. I don't have all the triggers yet because I haven't finalized the script, but there they are. Look at them. Click off the video now if you need to. Anyway, starting with Chapter 1. Initial symptoms and diagnosis. So, from the very start, the initial symptoms were in October of 2018. During PAX Australia, I was really tired. Those who were there with me will remember that. But I blew it off because I hadn't been good with my diet or exercise lately, so I'm just like, yeah, whatever, I'm unfit, I'm out of shape, and I'm overweight. But from then, I never really recovered. No matter what I did, I was always just tired. I was sleeping a ridiculous amount, taking a whole heap of time off work because of nausea, and it never really changed up until around December or February. I started to get really bad pains in my chest around here, like around this spot here, which honestly I once again just blew off because I'm not very self-conscious of that. Then in February, on Valentine's Day, I had the worst pang of pain I had had yet, and it lasted a long time, and finally Shai talked me in and basically shoved me in the car to the hospital, where I assumed it was going to be a pulmonary embolism or some form of blood clot, because heart issues run in my family. My dad has 4 stents in his arteries. We got in the ER around 10 p.m. and they took so long trying to draw blood from me. It was probably about 1 or 2 a.m. by the time we started to get results, where everything came back except for a really high, it's called a D-dimer value, which I don't particularly know what it means, I'm going to be honest, but it did point towards there being a blood clot somewhere in my body. However, since it was around, let's say 2, 3, maybe 6 a.m. by this point, the doctor, oh wise doctor, just discharged me with a script for codeine and said, yeah, it'll be fine. Thanks, mate. 10 out of 10 right there. But the pain never went away, and I was struggling to breathe. So about a week later, I went to see my GP, who took one look at that D-dimer result from the hospital and went, you're going to go get a CT scan. Which, once again, at this point, they thought it was going to be a heart issue. They thought it was going to be pericarditis at this stage, which is a buildup of fluid around the heart tissue. Me being me, though, I put off the scan until the pain got unbearable, and I went and got a CT scan. For those who haven't gotten any imaging done before, what they do is they do all the pre-prep, and they put you in the machine, and then when you come out, they get a doctor in to take a look at the photos that they've taken, and decide whether, if they look any good, if they're going to be able to get results from it. And they looked at it, and then they came back to me, kind of sheepishly, and went, can you jump back in? We want to get a scan slightly lower. So the initial scan was a scan about here-ish, because they were scanning for pericarditis. I think it captured from about here to about here. And the second scan, they wanted to get the stomach. Once again, I just thought this was going to be some form of blood clot. And I was worried because I thought, oh crap, I've actually got a blood clot somewhere. I'm going to have to get something done about that. I've got a big storm coming. So the next day, literally the next day, I get a call from my GP saying I urgently have to come in and see him. So I booked an appointment later that day, and he told me the news that I had lymphoma, which is obviously a massive shock for me. I basically couldn't feel anything emotionally after that. Just dissociated for the rest of the day. But luckily, my GP was in contact with a surgeon who had gotten an opening on the next Monday. So they booked a lymphectomy to take out a lymph node within my left shoulder. So it was located around here-ish, and I'm not sure how well it will show up on camera, but I've still got a scar there from that day at the surgery. That one there. And as it turns out, that lymph node was actually pressing on a nerve, which was the source of all of my pain. The reason they decided to remove it was to determine exactly what subtype of lymphoma it was. There's 2 types. There's Hodgkin's and non-hodgkins, with the Hodgkin's being the more easily treatable of the two, but there really isn't, a good cancer. Once again, they rushed the results to my GP and got another call to urgently come in. As a side note, this was March 8th, 2019 at this stage, my 21st birthday, where my GP officially told me I had a non-hodgkins lymphoma, T-cell lymphoblastic lymphoma. I later learned this runs in my family, but I had no idea about that at the time. So I had to be rushed to the Royal Melbourne Hospital to begin treatment the next day. So off we went, myself, my father, my grandmother, and Shai all jumped in the car and started heading into Melbourne. Once we were about 45 minutes out of town, for reference, I live about 2 hours away from Melbourne, we were called by the Royal Melbourne Hospital, the patient coordinator Emily, who looked at my scans and told me one of the nodes was actually pressing on my heart and she was worried. So we had to go all the way back to the Bendigo Base Hospital and get an ambulance to take me into Melbourne in case something happened. So back to Bendigo we went, where I was put into bed and told to wait for about 3 hours for an ambulance to be free. Would have made it to Melbourne by that time, but I understand the concern. On the plus side, some of the nurses that were on that night shift went down to Zuki, which is the cafeteria, grabbed me a cupcake, and they grabbed a tongue depressor and drew a candle on it and stuck it in the cupcake and gave it to me as like my 21st birthday cake. Whoever those nurses were, you're amazing, and thank you. It brightened my night. And finally, myself and Shai, because they can only have one guest, were taken into an ambulance, and then halfway there switched into a different ambulance, and off we went to the Royal Melbourne Hospital, taken up to the Blood Cancer Ward 7B, and admitted at 1:02 AM on March 9th. And that leads on to Chapter 2, the initial treatment and the initial tests. So on night 1, I was cannulated. They brought in a chair that would act as a fold-out bed for Shai, and we both got some really bad sleep and wondered what would happen next. So the next morning, I was introduced to some of the doctors who were going to look after me throughout all of my treatment, including my blood cancer specialist, Lynette, and they took a lot of blood, and over the next week, I was told I would be on a treatment known as the AYA protocol, which is basically a high-intensity chemotherapy for young adults, because younger bodies can handle it. Like, this is something you don't put older people on, because it could kill them. During this time, since cannulas can only be used for a few days before needing replaced, and my veins are a nightmare, look at that. It's completely monotone. They gave me what's called a PICC line. They gave it in my right arm. I think I've still got some of the... I want to have a quick look, yeah. You can't really tell through the camera, but right there, there's a little dot. What they do is they insert a tube into the arm. It goes into an artery, which then gets led all the way around here and rests about here-ish, just outside the heart. But that's used to both draw blood and inject medication and saline or whatever I need at the time straight into my bloodstream. Also, during this first investigatory period, I got my first bone marrow biopsy, which is a procedure where they apply local anesthetic to the lower hip and then push a needle all the way into the bone in order to get a sample of bone marrow and a sample of the bone itself in the hip. The main reason for this is to determine whether or not the cancer has entered into my bone marrow, which would then change my cancer designation from lymphoma to leukemia, which, to give you an idea, I've got, at this stage, around a 50-50 chance of surviving. If it had updated to leukemia, it would have been 80% chance of not surviving. This procedure is usually done under some form of sedation. They'll either put you completely under, or they'll give you a little green whistle that has Penthrox in it, in order to make the pain bearable, because it's something boring into a bone. But they were worried about my breathing due to one of the nodes down here again, and they wanted to make sure that I could breathe, so they didn't sedate me at all. So I had to undergo the procedure with nothing, and it is the worst pain I've ever been through. Shai still has a scar on the back of her hand from when I squeezed a bit to get through the pain, and I squeezed too hard and drew blood. So fun times for everybody. This AYA chemotherapy treatment lasted for about a fortnight, and it caused heavy nausea, fatigue, and weakness, but no other major symptoms, like no hair falling out, and it was all administered through that PICC line. So no matter where I went, I was connected to a little machine to give whatever was needed at the time. So yeah, I had a little buddy. That little stand became my best friend over the next year. All that was left was to go get a PET scan to find out if the treatment had made the nodes any smaller. For those unaware, a PET scan involves multiple steps. First, you have to be cannulated, because whether or not you have a central line, so that's a PICC line, a Hickman line, or a port. I'll go more into Hickman lines later. Ports, I will not. Because they have to inject you with a radioactive sugar, and they can't risk the sugar sticking to the inside of the line. After they inject the sugar, you have to sit as still as possible for about 40 minutes for the sugar to be distributed throughout your body. Then you gotta go pee, and then they take you into a room with what looks like a big donut. They lie you down and very slowly push you through the donut, and in and out, and in and out, and a long series of pictures of your entire body. And what it does is it keeps track of that sugar. It can read the sugar inside and can tell where the hot spots in your body are, which will light up for any enlarged lymph nodes because the body's trying to get more and more blood there. Had to wait about a week for the PET scan results, and when we got them, the treatment had made no difference. The lymph nodes had actually gotten larger. So time for a few more tests. First test was a spinal tap. Spinal taps suck. Under no anesthetic or anything, they apply local anesthetic to the lower part of your spine. You sit like a banana, curved over as much as possible, and they stick a needle all the way into your spine in order to get a sample of cerebrospinal fluid. You also have to sign a waiver to say you won't sue the hospital if you get paralyzed from the procedure. Yay. Another week goes by, and they let me know they're going to try an extended run of the AYA protocol. So the same drugs, just a higher dose, for another fortnight. Which, unfortunately, and unsurprisingly, didn't do anything for the cancer. It was still growing and still spreading. This seems like a good point to mention what makes this cancer so dangerous. I had an incredibly aggressive form of lymphoma. And lymphoma in itself is dangerous because it is a cancer that attacks the lymph nodes, which are the points in the body that both create and control the release of lymphocytes or white blood cells, which are what your body uses to fight infections, basically making my immune system worthless. So any form of infection while afflicted with lymphoma is possibly lethal. Just getting a common cold could kill you. Which is why there's an airlock system in order to even get into the blood cancer ward. If you have any symptoms of anything, you cannot come in, and visitors are restricted. Any temperature of above 37.5 degrees results in an immediate series of blood tests in order to make sure there's no infection within the PICC line, which can get really tedious when some forms of chemotherapy raise your temperature anyway. Fun. And that leads us to the worst decision I made. Chapter 3, the wrong decision to go home. After the extended chemotherapy, there was a break where my treatment team figured out exactly what treatment might actually make a difference. This is where I made the worst decision. I asked to be discharged and to go home, assuring them I would be able to take all of my medication and make it back into Melbourne 3 times a week for blood tests. Again, I live around 2 hours away, depending on train schedules and how they line up with my appointments. This led to every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday being 18-hour long days, waking up at 5 and only managing to get to bed at about 11 at the earliest. And during this, I was obviously not mentally okay, struggling to take my medication consistently. It was bad. And then they told me I had to come in every single day for follow-up blood tests. And my stubborn ass insisted I was fine and could do that. It was 18 hours a day, mostly traveling and waiting. And $50 a day on trains. It just was not sustainable. During this time, I actually met up with some of my family to celebrate my 21st birthday with a lovely Turkish dinner. While eating, I noticed my arm had swelled up, so instead of being yay wide, it was about here-ish. And within a few hours, my entire right arm had hardened, and it felt like a baseball bat. I could hit a home run with this thing. So we head over to the local ER once again, and they told me that my PICC line had developed a blood clot. What I learned later was this blood clot started around here, and went all the way down the PICC line all the way to just before my heart. They called Ward 7B and asked to take out the line, but they were told not to because 7B was seeing me in 2 days anyway. So the base discharged me with 2 days worth of Clexane to self-administer, and afterwards made my way back to 7B to have it removed. They put me on a high dose of Clexane to try and thin out the clot. and stupidly, I went home again. This is when reality hit, and I realized it wasn't doable. This was not sustainable from home. Broke down and started looking for options to stay in Melbourne closer to treatment. At some point, they took that PICC line out and put a new one in on my left side. This one just kept bleeding for a bit. It was really annoying, but eventually settled down. This is actually where we got really, really lucky. The Leukemia Foundation contacted us, said they had an apartment opening that they offered to myself and Shai, so we could stay there, close to the hospital, free of charge, and not have to worry about anything but my treatment. Thank you. That was a lifesaver. We gave our fur babies to trusted friends and family to look after, while we moved all of our essentials over to Melbourne, and before long I was readmitted to 7B for the next round of chemotherapy. And that brings us to Chapter 4, Chemo 2, Electric Boogaloo. Most of this round of chemo was honestly a blur because my mental state was not there. But I'll tell it the best I can. I got readmitted back into 7B and they started a set of new chemotherapy drugs. These ones sucked a lot more, made me really, really nauseous, just generally unhappy, affected my mood, affected my gut, affected a little bit of everything. Since all this, the team had actually been scouring all of the stem cell donor databases looking for a match to mine, so that when I went into remission, they could get a stem cell transfer completed. Real quick, remission is when the cancer cells start to shrink and go away. So in my case, when the nodes stop growing and instead shrink. Total remission is when the cancer cells are no longer properly picked up by a scan because there are so few left. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're cured, because scanning is not perfect with the current medical technology. But they hadn't found a match at all across the entirety of the country. So while the hospital expanded their search internationally, members of my family and some friends started getting themselves tested to see if there would be a match. Every single one of you who reached out and asked me how to help, you're amazing, and thank you. More on who ended up being my stem cell donor later. This run went on for about a month, and when we came to the end of it, I hoped for some form of change. We got the PET scan results back once again, and the nodes had not grown, but they hadn't gotten any smaller. So this treatment was also ineffective because we need to go into total remission before a transplant is possible. I will go into what the transplant is important for later as well. At this point, there were no realistic options. They discharged me, gave me a massive list of medications, including Clexane to self-administer, which is a needle to the stomach every single morning and night. So there were no treatments approved for use for my form of lymphoma anywhere within Australia. So, Lynette, my specialist, started looking elsewhere. Ended up looking into a drug called Nelarabine. But in order to try it, I had to get approval from the Australian medical authorities. So in the apartment we stayed. My options were running thin, and this was when I hit my darkest period of the year. I was trying to come to terms with the fact there was a good chance I was going to die at the age of 21. There was a point where I asked one of the doctors what would happen if I just refused treatment and decided to just try and live my best life for as long as I could. They gave me a maximum of 3 months. An absolute maximum at best, with it being a really bad quality of life. Because, again, this attacks my immune system, so I would just die to a cold. And people get colds all the time. And this was in winter at this point. I was so close to giving up. It's only thanks to Shai insisting that I go through one more round. Just one more and try it. But I wait until this round was done before deciding against further treatment. That I went through with it. If it didn't work, we're going to work through a bucket list and make it a great 3 months. And just to top it all off, I got the flu during this period. So back in hospital for 3 weeks while that cleared up, because again, anything could kill me here. There was nothing left to do but wait and hope. Chapter 5, Chemo Round 3, finally some hope. This third round sucked ass. This new drug, as mentioned above, was not approved for immediate use in Australia, and it was my last option. You had to have failed 2 other rounds of chemo before even applying for it. But back to 7B I went. This new drug knocked me on my ass. Absolutely massive nausea, unable to move most of the time. I started having issues with my memory and I had constant pains. And this is where my hair finally fell out, in classic chemo fashion. This round of treatment only went for a fortnight, but good God did it hit harder than any other. I could no longer stand properly even for the few days I was allowed out of the hospital. Just walking was a chore. When I was actually out of the hospital, I fell twice. I fell once down some stairs and once in the middle of a street crossing. After the fortnight, once again, we had to wait for the PET scan results, and the nodes had gone down. Finally, they had shrunk. So what happens now? Now that I'm in remission, it's time for tests. They need to get a baseline for all of my bodily functions, so it's time for PET scans, CT scans, ultrasounds, lung function tests, bone density scans, bone marrow biopsies. You get the idea. Not only that, but they'd finally managed to find a match for me. My mother was a match, but had had cancer in the past, so probably not the best bet. So the donor was finally chosen. It was actually my cousin, Tara, who luckily was also a match. After all of these tests, finally got a much needed break while they set everything up for the transplant. So I had to go to the hospital 3 times a week for blood tests and smaller doses of chemo to keep it all under control. And during this time, we got a surprise visit from a different cousin, Karen. My cousin from Queensland came down and we went to the Eureka Sky Deck, which is actually one of the things on my bucket list. Had a great dinner, just took my mind off everything for a day. Karen, thank you. You don't know how much this day meant. I will not forget it. About a month after everything was set up, it was time to begin my prep for the transplant. This started with another return to 7B, another week of Nelarabin to properly get rid of anything left, and then total body irradiation therapy twice a day. Half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening. This sucked, so I had to go through a week of radiation therapy. First, they made basically lead blocks the rough shape of my lungs, because that's the one spot they didn't want to hit with radiation. And gave me little tattoos. I've still got it right there. Will it show up on the camera? Probably not. Maybe. You can see a little black dot there, kinda. Yeah, my first tattoo. In order to line that up with a laser that comes out of the machine. And it was time to begin. For this, they put you in a metal cage with the lead lungs between you and the machine. And I had to stand up as straight as possible with my arms over some things and holding onto some handles. And just had to stand there for 15 minutes. Before I got a break, I got to sit down, have some water, then turn 180, jump back in, and do it again. It's really claustrophobic because you are literally boxed into a cage. And the weirdest thing is once the machine actually turns on and starts spraying radiation all at you, you can actually smell and taste the air ionize around you because of the high level of radiation. It is bizarre. The first day of treatment was fine. I was a bit fatigued and a little nauseous, but whatever. I thought this'll be nothing compared to Nelarabin. Yeah, on the second day I collapsed and threw up all over a bathroom. It was bad. It only got worse from there. I still had 3 days to go. I won't go into detail here for your insanity, but trust me, it sucked. Chapter 6. Transplant Time. After the week of radiation had completely and utterly killed my entire immune system, as designed, it was transplant time. I haven't explained what a stem cell transplant is yet, but its job is to replace my immune system. To oversimplify it for the sake of the video, my immune system is supposed to fight cancer cells. Everybody's does. Everybody's immune system fights these cells. But for whatever reason, my immune system had decided these cells were not a threat, so they'd gotten into the immune system and now spread. The idea of the stem cell transplant is to kill my immune system and replace it with someone else's, because someone else's will see those cancer cells and go, that's not supposed to be there, and kill them. So the total body irradiation was to make my current immune system as weak as possible, so that once the new stem cells were injected, they could take over and basically I would get my cousin's immune system like a hand-me-down. Transplant itself was actually really smooth. I was so exhausted I fell asleep, and by the time I woke up it was done. Cells were in. And this was after my cousin donating the stem cells. It basically sat in a hospital bed for about 6 hours getting blood drawn and put back in and drawn and put back in and drawn and put back in to get as many stem cells as possible, and hopefully not have to draw them ever again. At this point, I had actually had 3 PICC lines. There was the one that got the blood clot, the second one, which actually ended up getting an infection, and the third one was taken out around now in order to put what's called a Hickman line in. It's similar to a PICC in the sense it's a direct line to the heart, but instead of going through the arm, it goes straight through the chest. It's about here. That dot there, that dot right there, is where the Hickman line went in. The reason it goes through the chest is so the line can actually be much larger, and I get an extra nozzle on the line. And at this point, I actually had, so there were 3 nozzles coming out of it, and each of those nozzles had a 3-way tap on it. So I could have 9 IVs hooked up at once. And that actually wasn't enough. I ended up needing to have more. Like at one point, I think they had the 9 on and then put another splitter on one of them. And this began the worst part of the whole year. Post-transplant, I couldn't stand, I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. Anything I had, I either threw up or spat out because my throat had decided nothing other than ice water was allowed down. So I was put on a constant saline drip and put on a feeding tube. It is the strangest feeling to never ever eat or drink anything, but at the same time, never feel hungry or thirsty. But it's not one I'm looking to repeat. I was also in just intense pain. I was actually hooked up to a pain management system. Let me press a button once per 5 minutes to get a dose of ketamine. Ketamine instead of morphine purely because I learned the hard way I'm allergic to morphine. Because of the amount of pain, it took 3 button presses just to go to the bathroom. 1 to dull the pain so I could even stand up, 1 to get off the toilet, and 1 once I was back in bed, because it was just intense. Even all of my meds were being done intravenously at this point because I could not swallow them. After a few weeks, this actually got worse. I contracted a hospital-borne disease known as C. diff. For your own sake, I'm not going to go into detail here, but I'll give you a little hint. It hurt like hell to sit down, and I was wearing adult diapers. I think you can figure the rest out from there. It was like this for about 20 days, just a living hell, before I could eat and drink enough to be taken off the IV lines one by one. Nowhere near eating a healthy amount, but I was on dietary supplements after talking to a dietitian to supplement that. There was a delicious watermelon drink that was my savior and basically what I lived off for the next month. And I slowly and slowly built back up to eating. I lived off these watermelon things and Nando's chicken for a good 6 months. Another round of massive testing to see exactly what this had done to my system and establish a new baseline. I was finally let out and back to the apartment. Chapter 7. Recovery up until now. After all of my tests were finally completed, I got let out and I actually met up with some people for PAX Oz 2019. I never actually went into the convention myself, I just had the chance to say hi to some people I had barely seen for almost a year at this point. Unfortunately, I also contracted the flu again, and it was back to the fucking hospital for a few weeks until I recovered. And then a few weeks extra, because even after the flu went, my temperature just never dropped below 37.5 for a couple weeks. After about a month, they finally let me out, and I was allowed home. Not just to the apartment, I was properly allowed to head back home, get all of our fur babies back. Since then, it's been nothing but an uphill struggle. I didn't take the time to process any of that yet, and I went straight back to work, working from home, before it was cool. In hindsight, this was the wrong call. I should have taken time to process, and I really haven't properly processed until I wrote out this script. But it's the one I went with. A couple months after coming back, we got our baby Jinx, and he has been one hell of a distraction. Very, very good little baby who absolutely hates me. Post-stem cell transplant has also been really strange, because I've had to relearn all of my tastes. It actually reset my taste buds. Some things I used to hate are now the best things on the planet, and vice versa. Also, I can't go anywhere near pastry without feeling nauseous, because it's all I could eat in the hospital. Pretty much every meal was sausage rolls and party pies. because it's all I could stomach. I've had to very, very slowly get back into exercising, as the transplant left me the weakest I've ever been. I'm finally mentally and physically prepared to get back into it. I just started exercising again. And ultimately, that brings us to today, the 30th of August 2021. 2 years to the day after my transplant. I've just had all of my tests redone again over the last week. And the 2-year with no cancer relapses mark is where they're willing to say the cancer is cured. With current medical tech, as mentioned before, we can never be 100% sure, but 2 years is generally how long it takes to come back. As this video comes up, I am speaking with Lynette, my specialist, to find out if I'm cured or not. If I'm cured, then my tests will no longer be every month. It will be, I think, yearly to begin with, and then like bi-yearly. And if the tests have come back that it's flared back up, there's nothing left to do. There are no more treatments for what I have. Either way, I will drop a comment down below once I'm out of the appointment. See you on the other side. I also haven't gone into COVID because obviously 2020 was when COVID started. When COVID hit the entire planet, and me being recovering from a stem cell transplant, my immune system is still to this day incredibly weak. And it's going to just have to gradually build up. So that was just incredibly scary because Melbourne is where all the cases are in Victoria. It's the capital of the state. But that's where I had to go every month for my appointments. Side note, get vaccinated, don't be an idiot. If you can get vaccinated, go and do it. Not for yourself. For people like me, who cannot defend themselves, who don't have the immune system to defend themselves. Now I've simplified and skipped over a lot of things here today. Some because I didn't want to get too detailed or too technical and have this be a 4-hour-long video. Some because after radiation therapy my memory is fragmented, and because of how traumatic the year was, I've forgotten a lot of details. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. I will do my best to answer them. To finish this video, there are a few people specifically who I have to thank, because without them there is no chance I would be sitting here today and making this video. Shy, you stayed beside me for the entire journey. You convinced me to go to the hospital initially. You convinced me to go and get my CT scan. You convinced me to go with the 3rd round of chemo. I would not be here today for you. I owe you my life. Thank you. Nick, Dingo, and Tam. You guys came around during some of the toughest periods of this entire year. You guys gave me the energy to keep going and help me forget what was happening at the time. Thank you. Despite what Dingo said that one time. You know what I'm talking about. Nini, every time you came, you brought an activity with you. Whether it was painting my nails or filling my room with plushies, you always helped me get away from the hospital for a day, even without ever leaving my hospital bed. You have no idea how much that meant. Thank you so much. Karen, that visit after the Nelarabin treatment is something I will always remember. You crossed 2 states just to help. Thank you. Tara, there's no way you're escaping this list. You are the reason I'm alive today. It is your immune system that is coursing through my body and has changed my blood type. It's because of you I live and breathe today. And I know the day you donated was one hell of a day. I think it was like 6 hours of having your own blood drawn and put back. You are amazing. I owe you my life as well. I just gotta find a second one to give. Dad and Mayo. You guys came every single weekend that it was feasible. I don't remember a weekend when you weren't there. And you brought Nana around all of those weekends before she moved up to Queensland. Thanks for being there. Even if you didn't say much, you always brought food and smiles to the ward. And sorry for all the money I borrowed through the year. Tob and Mother. thank you so much for looking after the fur babies while we couldn't. I know that had to have been tough to just suddenly have them dumped on you, but thank you. It means I still get to snuggle them today. Angel. The stream before my transplant where you came and raided, it reminded me how many people there are out there who care. It gave me more hope for the transplant working. Thank you so much. And I've just got to thank my workplace. The signed cards with personalized messages from almost all of the departments are something I would treasure for the rest of my life. They are right next to me, just up there, just out of camera view. Thank you. If I missed anyone here, I am incredibly sorry. As mentioned, my memory isn't the best. It is fragmented, and there's a lot of things I've forgotten or twisted or anything. Anyone who so much as just sent me a supportive message once through the year, thank you. You don't know how much each and every one of those messages meant. If I didn't respond, I'm sorry, but I read every single one multiple times. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this. Hope if nothing else, this gives you some insight into the process. I'm not looking for pity or sympathy. I just wanted to get this out there, and maybe it'll help somebody realize, oh, this fatigue or nausea that I'm feeling, it isn't right. Just go get tested. It won't hurt. It'll just give you that peace of mind, and you won't have to go through what I did. If I had waited any longer, I wouldn't have been here today. Even if that doesn't apply to you, I hope this gives some insight as to what maybe someone you know is going through or went through, and just gives you an appreciation of all of that, because I have a completely different outlook on life after all of this. I have a completely different idea of death, because I had to look it in the face. I had to look at my death coming in the next 3 months and accept that. So if someone is fundamentally changed after a treatment like this, just please understand that. I'm including a link down below to donate to the Leukemia Foundation. That apartment saved both myself and Shy and just let me worry about treatment. If you have any money to spare, please consider sending it over. They deserve every single cent. What they do is amazing. Have an amazing day, everybody. I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully it'll be a little more upbeat than this. Bye bye.